So this 2017 15-inch MacBook Pro has been my workhorse for the past 3 years, and wouldn't you know that as soon as Apple released their new computers with their own new chip, the M1 chip, this computer decided to give up on me. It just won't boot up properly anymore, and because I run all the facets of my YouTube channel and my photography and videography business through my computer, I couldn't have any downtime. So I hopped down to the Apple Store and figured why not be an early adopter and pick up one of their new computers with the M1 chip. So the model that I picked up is the MacBook Pro 13-inch, of course with the M1 chip, and I've actually got a slightly upgraded version here with 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. I'm surprised they had these upgraded versions in stock in the store, although I did have to drive a little over 2 hours away to pick it up. Anyway, for comparison, the MacBook Pro that I'm coming from was a bit bigger at 15 inches and was outfitted with a 3.1 gigahertz i7, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 2 terabyte SSD. Despite being a smaller computer, this new 13-inch MacBook Pro, which is now about 3 years newer than the 2017 15-inch model that I had, outperforms it in nearly every way, and it's very noticeable. Now, my purpose for creating this video is to share with you how the new MacBook Pro 13-inch with the M1 chip fits into my workflow as both a photographer and videographer. And if you're watching this video based on the title, you probably also like to shoot photos and or videos, and you're probably wondering if this new computer with the new chipset from Apple is going to improve your workflow and make things easier, or if it's going to just make things harder, because it's not all going to be great coming from these new ARM-based chips, because of course that change from Intel is going to mess things up just a little bit. Now, I can say that on the surface level with applications like Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe Photoshop, as well as Adobe Lightroom, all 4 apps we'll be taking a look at here in just a couple of minutes, all of those improvements have been great, especially in Final Cut Pro. It makes things so much faster on the render and export times. It saves me a good amount of time, again, coming from that 15-inch Intel-based MacBook Pro. But I think that some of the smaller changes implemented here because of this new chipset really are going to improve the overall user experience of this computer for the better. So everything really begins when we open up a computer with this new M1 chip, whether it be the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, or the Mac Pro. When we first open the lid here, it wakes up instantly. And I know that this is something that they really pushed in the keynote, or I guess inside of their presentation. And while it might be a relatively smaller change, it just kind of alludes to the general snappiness and overall feel of how fast this computer is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and start up a QuickTime Player screen recording just so you guys can see my screen here. I'm going to put it up on either side of the screen. I'll go ahead and hide that. So let's go ahead and open up a native Mac app, the App Store. It opens up so fast. I mean, it didn't even have time to finish its first bounce animation down there in the dock, and it was open and ready to use. Even some third-party apps like Twitter, this opens up pretty fast. I'm not even logged in. Chrome is going to open up pretty fast as well. So the general snappiness and speed of this computer is just great. And that kind of translates as we get into other apps like Final Cut Pro. You'll see the export and render times in there. It's going to be pretty insane. But also, battery life. That is a huge improvement here in these new computers that come with the M1 chip. Right now I've got 29%, and if I was using my other computer with those Intel chips, I would be running for a charger, because if I did anything that put a lot of load on the battery, it would probably die within 10-15 minutes. But with these computers, with the M1 chip, the battery life is great. I'll give you an example here. This is a screenshot I took from the other day. So I'm on 94% battery up there in the top right corner, and I last charged my computer up to 100% at 3:30. I unplugged at 3:30. So in the 50 minutes that I was using my computer, writing a script, using all the apps open down there on the bottom, and also uploading some files up there in the top right corner in Dropbox, it only went down 6%. Now, in a more of like a power user scenario, I exported 6 7-minute videos from Final Cut Pro. So 6 7-minute individual videos, whatever that total is. 7 times 6 is 30, 42. So 42 minutes of 4K video, and only dropped my battery 35% down to 65%. And that is great. You can do a lot of work here on battery power, and it's going to handle pretty well. So now that we've gone over some of the smaller things that I kind of wanted to throw in here, now let's get into some of the information on the 4 apps I want to cover: Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe Photoshop, as well as Adobe Lightroom. And for each of these applications, I want to take a look at specific use cases with them to understand how that M1 chip is going to help us in terms of performance. So when we start talking about these video editing applications, I want to see how fast it opens up a project. I want to see how it fares as we scrub the timeline. I also want to see how it fares when we play back video on the timeline. I want to check out the render speed of a project, and then I want to see the export speed of that project, both an unrendered timeline as well as a fully rendered timeline. So the first app that I want to take a deep dive into is Final Cut Pro. It's my favorite video editing application. It's probably the app that I use the most on my Mac, and I do tend to use Premiere Pro when I need to do more of like a higher level complex edit, but Final Cut Pro and its optimization makes me come back to it all of the time for smaller projects that I do on the daily because it is so well optimized. So first, let's take a look at how fast it can open up a project here. We've got it clicked, we've got it selected. We'll go ahead and open it and start. Bouncing. It's going to be fast. I'm going to give you guys a spoiler. Okay, I'll stop it. Because it's loaded. It's loaded in the background, but it gives me this pop-up all the time. So hit OK, click it. Boom, we're in here, we're editing. So that was 5.02. 5 seconds it took to launch Final Cut Pro. That's pretty quick. That's like as fast as opening up the App Store almost. So let's see, we'll open this up. We'll open up this project here. And this was a vlog I uploaded a couple of weeks ago when Ken came up here to visit. I'll make this full screen. And as you can see, this is a fully unrendered timeline. So we can go ahead and scrub through. We'll turn off the snapping. It scrubs through really well. There's really no dropped frame rate. I mean, scrubbing isn't always going to be the perfect frame by frame look because you are moving a little bit faster. But if we scrub through slowly, yeah, it's nice and smooth even in an unrendered timeline. And all of these clips here have some sort of color grade done to them through, let's see, we've got like color board, hue saturation curves, and color wheels done to all of these clips. So let's go ahead and try to play these clips back and see how smooth it is. We'll mute this. Yeah, this is almost like you're watching a fully rendered video. So it's nice and smooth. You can see that the frame rate right there in the middle of the screen is also constantly going up. So there's no jumping here in the video. It just plays back nice and smooth. We do have a transition right here in the front. Let's go ahead and try to play through the transition. There's a couple of dropped frames when we go and we take a look at a transition here. But of course, when we render out this whole entire timeline, it's going to be a lot better. So speaking of render times, Final Cut Pro absolutely flies when it comes to rendering and exporting a project. So this right here is a full 7-minute and 30-second long project. It is shot entirely in 4K and it's exported entirely in 4K. I've got all of the clips here located on the SSD on the computer. I'm not going to be pulling off of like an external drive or an SD card or an external SSD. Everything is being pulled directly from the SSD on the actual computer itself. And I was able to render this entire video in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. That's pretty fast. But this is something that doesn't make sense. I was able to export the video faster in an unrendered state than when it was fully rendered. And I did it a couple of times to make sure that I didn't mess anything up. But when I exported an unrendered timeline here, the 7-minute and 30-second project, it was able to spit it out in 5 minutes and 42 seconds compared to 6 minutes and 27 seconds when it was fully rendered. That doesn't really make sense to me, but at the end of the day, it is able to export this video and render it out so fast. And that's why I continue to come back here to Final Cut Pro. So there is absolutely no doubt that Final Cut Pro is going to be the most well-optimized application out of the bunch that we're looking at here because it was made by Apple for their new chips. And I just have to say that even though I've been a longtime Final Cut Pro user and I'm used to it, it's something that kind of digs its roots deeper into me because I'm so used to that speed that when I now show you guys the performance on Premiere Pro, you're gonna say, wow, that's a big difference. So I've been editing on this machine for the past couple of days now. I've been primarily using Final Cut Pro basically 99% of the time. So what I did is I tried to recreate that same exact video that I edited here inside of Premiere Pro. It's not perfect, but it does give us a really good baseline of how the two are going to compare here on Apple Silicon. And going here forward, it should be noted that all of these Adobe apps are beta versions of the application. So it's not the full optimized version for Apple Silicon, and it's going to be something that I'm going to take a look at here in a couple of months as they continue to get updates through the Creative Cloud to fully work on Apple Silicon, because I do expect them to get even better here over time. But initially, Final Cut Pro blows Premiere Pro out of the water. So let's go ahead and do an open test, see how fast it can open up this project. So we'll double click and start the clock. It's going to take a little bit longer opening up this project. But again, here on Apple Silicon, it does open up fairly fast. So we're at about 10 seconds. It opens. 13 seconds, 14 seconds. Boom, there. Okay, so about 17 seconds to open the project. That's pretty good. I mean, 17 seconds is an easy time to wait. So we've got an unrendered timeline here. This is, for all intents and purposes, the same exact video without some of the pizzazz that I added to it because I didn't want to have to re-edit it all the way. So let's go ahead and scrub through. So there is a little bit of lag, a little bit more lag than what I experienced with Final Cut Pro, but again, this is a fully unrendered timeline. But it's able to really smoothly scrub through, which is great. Let's go ahead and just try to watch this clip unrendered. It plays back really great too, and as you can see, we are playing this back in a full resolution. It's not downscaled at all, and it's playing unrendered fine. Yeah, so the overall usability of Premiere Pro is still up there with Final Cut Pro. Like, you're gonna get a really great experience here on this new Apple Silicon computer, on any of the Apple Silicon computers, but when we compare the numbers to Final Cut Pro, the render times as well as the export times, that's where we see this huge, steep difference. So with Premiere, of course, the open time was like around 17 seconds, but the render speed of this same project was 8 minutes and 54 seconds. That's only about 5 minutes longer, nothing horrible, but the export time for an unrendered and rendered timeline is right there around 35-ish minutes. And that's a lot longer than what we get with Final Cut Pro. I mean, I could render out like 7 videos in the time that I could render out one video with Premiere. So I think by running more or less the same project through Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro, it gives us a good understanding of what to expect from Apple Silicon in the future. We can see what a well-optimized application can do, and we can also see what an application that is kind of half-optimized can do. Again, Premiere Pro and all the Adobe apps are in beta, which of course is going to limit their performance here on Apple Silicon, and I don't think it's ever going to be as fast as Final Cut Pro, but I think in the coming months, we're going to see some really good enhancements and improvements to Adobe's full suite of software. And as I said in the beginning, I mentioned how your workflow can either become better or it can become worse. Well, if you notice in Final Cut Pro, almost all of my plugins don't work right now. I heavily rely on Color Finale in order to color grade my videos. I've got everything set up where it's basically presets for no matter what I'm shooting. But now I've got to rebuild those presets without Color Finale because it's not expected to be supported here for Final Cut Pro until early 2021, which who knows when that's going to be, but I've got to adapt because it doesn't work here on the M1 chip. So again, there's a lot of great things, but there's also a couple of bad things that you're going to have to adapt to depending upon what your workflow is like. So now, let's jump into Photoshop. Let's jump into the photo editing side of things, which really isn't going to be as in-depth as what we were doing with editing video, just because there's so many different facets to putting that together. So let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop here. We're going to try and open up a Photoshop file, so we'll open it. Let's see. Probably shouldn't take too long. See, it's 271 megabytes. I've got a couple of photos in here. All right, so stop. So right about 9 seconds for the launch time for this specific Photoshop file here. Now, I can say I'm not a heavy Photoshop user. I don't have hundreds and hundreds of layers in here. Usually, I'm working with anywhere between like 5 to 20 layers. So in this specific photo, this was the end result. I just did a quick blend here. So I've got one photo that kind of is exposed for the actual ground, and then I've got one photo exposed for the sky. So if we add a quick layer mask on here, we can just erase the top. Yeah, I mean, this is performing perfect, buttery smooth. I really haven't done a ton of Photoshop work here on the new Apple Silicon Mac, but look, I mean, it's working great. For masks, it's working good. I think that I'm not the best case scenario for Photoshop because I don't primarily use Photoshop. I'm only in here maybe a couple of times a week, but regardless, it does a really good job at performing well. There's no lag. I mean, I could go and try to resize multiple clips here. We'll go ahead and let's see, it's this key combination. No, sorry. What is the key combination? It's this in order to there. So yeah, I mean, it resizes fine. There's no lag. So yeah, Photoshop runs great. It runs great for what I need it to do, but I think that heavier users might want to look at some other videos that are really going to go in depth on Photoshop. And of course, in this video, we're only lightly touching on these applications. We're not going to go fully in depth. So Photoshop is good. We'll go ahead and save this project here. The save time might take a little bit longer because we are working with a 270 megabyte file here. But now that we're done Photoshop, just kind of seeing how it operates and showing that it works here, we'll quit and we will jump into Lightroom. Now, specifically, I use the cloud version of Lightroom. It's just such a great tool being able to have this accessible on all of my devices. So that's the reason I use cloud. So we're gonna go ahead and filter this because I've already rated 4 stars equal. So we have got 75 photos here, all of which were taken with the Mavic 2 Pro. They're just bracketed photos. I like to shoot brackets just because if you're flying around and you don't get the exposure right, you've got other photos to choose from. So we've got 75 brackets to work with here, 75 photos that are going to give us a good understanding of some of the batch, I guess, processes you can run over, and also just the general usability of Lightroom here on Apple Silicon. So if I wanted to directly edit this image using, the panel on the right side, it works fine. Like, there's no stutter, there's no lag. Immediately when I change that bar, it's perfectly on point. We'll go and hit Command Z. So it's perfectly moving with my movement on the bar. I'm not waiting for it to catch up. It's nice. So it works really well. So let's go ahead, we'll copy these settings, and we're gonna drag all the way across, and we're gonna paste it across all of the photos, 75 photos. So we'll go ahead and we will paste and start. Oops. Let's see, we'll restart that. We'll go ahead and paste and start. So we're pasting full edits to 75 photos here. It should be fairly fast. Usually I like to do these batch processes when I'm starting up like a full project and I've got a ton of photos I want to edit. I'll start with a preset, copy, paste across the whole entire way. And we are coming to an end right now. Okay, so 17 seconds, I'd say probably was 17 and a half seconds. I didn't hit it right on the mark, but that was pretty fast. So now let's go ahead and batch export these photos. So we'll export them. We'll just do full-size JPEGs here. These are 20 megapixel files, again, from the Mavic 2 Pro. We'll go ahead and hit export 25 or 75 photos. We'll just export them directly to our downloads folder, and we'll again time this. So let's see. I've done a couple of, I guess, batch exports through Lightroom, haven't had an issue. I've noticed that in the beginning it hangs up here. So it says 0 of 75. I'm wondering if this is a cloud Lightroom thing. I'm wondering if it needs to download files in the beginning. But regardless, the process of exporting these files really isn't all that slow. It's pretty fast here on Apple Silicon. Although it's definitely a process. I don't want to sit here and talk through the entire time. So let's speed this up towards the end. All right, so I just got done running through 2 different exports of these 75 files, so 150 files in total. And my second time was like a full minute, over a minute longer than what I got with my first export. Now, I've got to say that in previous times, I've gotten some much better luck in terms of exporting images through Lightroom, but this is just the entire thing surrounding this new M1 chip, is that it's a little bit unpredictable. I think that my final verdict is if you're a Final Cut Pro editor, you should probably think about upgrading to a computer with the M1 chip if you haven't upgraded your Mac recently, because it is going to make a very big difference. But if you're somebody that really relies on Adobe's suite or maybe any other third-party apps, I would wait. And I think that a lot of other people are going to tell you to wait. And I think the only reason why I'm not upset about this purchase is the battery life as well as the Final Cut Pro performance. Those 2 things are enough for me to keep this machine, use it, daily drive it, because I am addicted to the power and I'm addicted to the battery life. Now let me listen. Let me put this up here. If you guys can hear that, you can't probably, because there's no fan noise. And that's something I've noticed with this machine, is that with Final Cut Pro, I haven't heard the fans kick on once. Rendering, exporting, hours of video editing, the fans have not kicked on once. Now, when I'm rendering in Final Cut Pro, I notice it gets a little bit warm to touch, and that's about it. And then when I'm rendering in Premiere Pro, the fans are kicking like crazy. So with these Adobe apps, they're not yet optimized. I think that that's something that really needs to be driven home here in this video, and I'm sure that I have over the past couple of tests that I've done. But I think this brings us to our final point, and it's the fact that this is a 13-inch laptop, and this is, I think the highest end and the most expensive computer you can buy right now with an M1 chip. And it makes me wonder, why did they not create a 16-inch laptop with the M1 chip? Why did they stop at the 13-inch? I know that Apple has their ways of doing things, but having a smaller machine, it's okay for portability reasons, but coming from the 15-inch, it does feel a little bit smaller. I do feel cramped on the screen when I'm doing longer editing sessions, and the fact that we've only got 2 USB 4 Thunderbolt ports over here. That's kind of a bummer because I'm usually editing off of multiple drives, right? I've usually got like 2 SSDs, a charger, and I've got a couple of other things plugged in, and I'm usually fighting for space with 4 ports. So now that I'm cut down to 2 ports, it's kind of a bummer, and I'm definitely going to be living on that dongle and hub life. But it is good. The one thing that's great about a 13-inch laptop is that you've got the 60-watt power input to charge the device. So you can run it off of like a hub, you can run it off of your monitor if you've got a monitor with Thunderbolt. So it doesn't have a power-hungry battery just like those 16-inch and the 15-inch laptops do. But yeah, guys, I think that pretty much wraps up this first impressions look at the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 chip. I am really excited to see where Apple goes with this in the coming years. I think that this is a long-term play, and I think that Apple knows that because they're still making Intel-based Macs. They're not only making these M1 machines, but I think that in 2 or 3 years, it is going to be really interesting to see what we can do with these machines because I'm already blown away, and it is a first-gen device. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of these new Macs down in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.